George. How was your day?
Mighty fine. How about yours?
It was, well, quite well. My business, it has been growing rapidly.
You know, it's funny how we are today. I was just thinking about the time that we were once immigrants.
Oh, the time when we were immigrants. I remember every part of the journey, even when I was first leaving England.
How our families did not want us to leave. I remember when the famine when I was in Ireland. Many people I knew died. The potatoes' roots were destroyed, and so was the well-being of Ireland.
Well, no famine happened to me, but the reason I left was religious persecution. The day I left was one of the worst days of my life. But now looking back at it, it had to be one of the best decisions I have ever made.
I don't quite remember your story. If you will, may you please tell it to me again?
Sure.
Before you start, would you like me to prepare a toast?
Oh, yes indeed. Thank you.
A toast to our new lives. Cheers.
Cheers. Sorry. It was the date of May 16th, 1897. I was sending a letter to my aunt, and that's when I heard my mother call to me. As I heard her call, I walked over to her. I remember her exact words. They were, "Oh, William, your father was terribly beat down while he was at a temple. A soldier saw him practicing our religion, so your father was hit." She then called for my father to walk in. As soon as I saw him, a tear rolled down my cheek. I was 14, so I was not used to seeing people so mistreated. I asked my father if he was okay. In pain, he told me he was fine. He took a seat near my mother. That whole night, my brother and I sat with him.
That sounds horrible.
I was angry. I did not want anyone in my family to be hurt this way. So as I was lying on my bed, I decided that I would immigrate to America. I heard that boys my age would leave often, taking steerage to come to America. I also committed to leaving the very next day. I quickly gathered all my stuff, such as fruit and bread, one pair of clothes, and a photo, then fell asleep.
Wow, you decided to leave? My family told me to leave.
I knew me leaving would give them a more livable life. Soon, morning arrived. I awoke at 5 o'clock in the morning, quickly writing a note that I had left. I then spotted my family's life savings, making me remember that I needed money on the journey. Knowing that what I was doing was not the best idea, I grabbed the life savings and I walked out the door.
It must have been hard leaving.
It was, but I had made the decision, so I had to leave. I counted my money, and I noticed I had enough for a train. I made my way over to a train station in Amsterdam. I waited at least 2 hours before it was my turn to buy my train ticket to Hamburg, Germany. The train ride was 8 hours long. As soon as I came near the port of Hamburg, I instantly heard the horns of steamships carrying away hopeful people like me to the land of freedom. I imagined me on the boat, making my way to the place that would repair the justice of my family and me. The conductor then told us that we have arrived at our destination. I got off the train and saw tens of thousands of people boarding their boats. I quickly directed my attention to the sign that said steerage tickets for sale. I walked over to it, and the clerk told me right away to go to the back of the line. Tired, I obeyed. I had to wait 4 hours before I got to take my ticket. They took the money I had and took away most of it. I was only left with a little bit. Smoke billowed out of every ship I saw. I was then told to go to medical checkups. Seagulls glided over me as I found where medical checkups were. They were booths that had long lines stretching out of them.
I remember the medical checks. I had to wait long hours before I was checked. The officers checking me were doing dehumanizing checkups. They finally let me leave. I saw a few people who were turned back due to their medical conditions. Luckily, I was allowed through the booths into the dock. Loud ship horns blasted in my ears, the water splashing around as the boats arrived and left the docks.
The medical process was truly unpleasant. The dock was the start of my path to finally reaching freedom. People like me were lined up against a wall as we all slowly boarded individual boats as each one filled. I waited a full day, but finally the time came of me boarding the ship. I took one glance back at my home. Flashbacks of my family and I appeared in my head. I wiped a tear away as it came down my cheek. Without thinking any more, I stepped onto the boat. I took one step in, but then I was crammed into one spot right away. People were squirming around. The smell of the lower deck was horrible. It took about an hour until the whole ship was full. Soon the ship took off to go to America. The whole journey took about 10 long days. I say long because the conditions were getting worse every day. 3 days in, disease started spreading through the lower deck. Almost like a wave, it took everything with it. People were coughing, bleeding out of their mouths. Many didn't even move. I was scared because I knew that if my conditions were bad enough, I would be sent back. The thought of that, after all I have done, I would be put into a hole that I knew I couldn't get out of. Pushing those thoughts aside, I thought of all I would achieve. About 4 days later, people were thrown overboard since they died due to a disease I was told called smallpox. I prayed for every single one of those bodies that had to go. I was traumatized. The final days of the journey were terrible. I ran out of food or it all rotted, so I was starving. But then the day came. The ship slowed down drastically, so I took a peek at the upper deck, and I instantly dropped to my knees and cried. The tears were not of sadness, but they were of joy. I knew the people around me felt the same, since their faces were the happiest faces I have ever saw since I left the port. I saw a large statue. It was a beautiful green, and it held a book in one hand and a torch in the other. Directly in front of me, I saw a great big building. Another English person near me told me that it was the building that would determine whether or not I would be an American. Before I was told that, the building was ordinary. But now the building was like a gateway to a new life. I thanked God for making me fortunate enough to be where I am. Although I had reached Ellis Island, I was yet to know whether I would step through those doors becoming an American or be turned back.
Ellis Island was truly amazing, but in many ways it was terrifying.
I first had to get off the boat. This process alone took 3 full hours. I was filled with hopes for my future. Everyone was talking, laughing, and they were happy. The boat is what placed the tracks to my journey to America. So as I got off of it, I looked back at it, knowing that it was what carried me to my freedom. A swarm of people barged from behind me. I walked into Ellis Island and saw a huge flag stretched across the front wall. If everything worked in my favor, I knew that the flag hanging would be the one of my new nation. Metal railings separated enormous lines of people trying to get into the land of the free. I walked into one of the lines. Once I walked in, I felt like a drop of water in the whole sea. There were thousands of people surrounding me, officers, doctors, and immigrants. I had to wait 4 hours until I finally got called up to state my name and where I was from. I told him my name was William Millison and that I was from York. He then wrote on a paper, William York. I was going to tell him that Millison was my last name, but an officer quickly pulled me away to another line. I waited an hour to get checked. I then stepped into a little booth. An officer did the most shameful check ever to me. It was even worse than when I got checked in Hamburg. He marked a lot of other people with chalk signs on their suits, but he didn't mark me with any. Although he did ask me 32 questions and did a checkup in 2 minutes. I didn't know whether this was good or bad, but I hoped it was on the positive side. The officer grabbed me by the shoulder, and another officer directed me to a doctor who quickly checked me, saying that I had smallpox. After that, he said that I had to stay in quarantine for 3 months. They brought me down to a small tunnel that was dark. There were metal doors aligned against its walls. They brought me to one and put me in it. They said that I had to wait 3 months until I could leave. I was taken by shock. I was so close to finally becoming an American, and now they do this to me? During those 3 months, I sang songs that I remembered from England, such as Silent Night. I also thought about what would happen once I stepped through those doors. I asked myself what profession I would take on. I had always wanted to take on being in business with railroads. The 3 months were slow and hard. After the 3 months were over, they brought me back up. I hadn't seen any other people in so long, it felt like I had entered a whole new world. An immigration officer brought me to the same doctor who had put me in quarantine. He checked me again and said that I was cured. They brought me food in quarantine, which I remembered was the best food I ate ever since I left my home. I was then dragged over, and a line was in front of me as an officer put me in a specific spot. I peeked around the person in front of me and saw that an officer was taking a metal hook and was pulling back people's eyelids. It looked disgusting. I had to go through it too. As it was my turn, an officer pulled back my eyelid. As soon as that hook touched my eye, I quickly backed away in pain. The officer told me that if I didn't cooperate, I would not be able to pass. Hearing him say that I wouldn't be able to continue on was frightening, so I rapidly walked back to him and allowed him to do the inspection. He told me to grab my luggage and to walk through the doors in the back.
It was almost as if joy was spewing out of me. I remember this point in my story as well. The happiness of my success had filled to my brim. I stepped out those doors, turning back, looking at my new flag. I knew that I was now under the power of this flag, and I was now officially an American.
I had to exchange any money I had left into American dollars. I then took a ferry into New York Harbor. The boat roped itself against the dock once we arrived. I noticed that the number of people that were now Americans was lower than I expected it to be. Another Englishman near me asked me where I was going to settle. I had no reply to him. When I came, I had never thought about it. He told me that he was first going to settle in New York. Then he whispered to me that he would live in a 5-cent spot lodging. I wondered why he whispered, but then he told me that they were illegal, but only 5 cents if you wanted to stay in them. That was when I got off the boat. The man told me that if I wanted to join him, I should follow him. I thought a few times before making my decision, but then I finally said I would come with him. We walked about 3 miles until he told me that we had arrived at the lodging. The lodging looked exactly the same as all of the other buildings, but when we walked in it, it was a completely different world. We had just enough space to make our way around to the stand where we paid for the lodge. People were sleeping on their own luggage. They barely had enough room to stretch their legs out, and since there was no bathtub, The whole place smelled terrible. I made my way over to a little section where a few men were talking. Some were even singing songs that I remembered from York. I was confused at this because I saw so many people on the boat that had no idea how to talk in English, but now I'm in a whole building full of them. I then stepped out of the lodge and heard many people speaking just how I spoke. I saw a few people sipping cups of tea as well. It almost felt like I was back in York. I saw a boy my age near me. I asked him why everyone talked and acted just like they did in England. He told me that I was in an enclave. He later also said that enclaves were almost like cultural neighborhoods. They were places where the same group of people live so that everyone can manage their lives just a little easier. Night soon arrived and I went back into the lodge. Trying to get in a comfortable position was hard. For a few minutes I was fine, but then I couldn't breathe. In fact, judging off of everyone's faces, no one around me could breathe either. I later saw men get up, but at that point I was so tired I didn't bother asking where he was going. I fell asleep quickly, and morning arrived. People were talking to each other about a man who had fallen off the roof trying to get fresh air during the night. I didn't pay attention to it much, but then I realized that it was the man I saw getting up at night who had died. I felt sorry for him. I later started walking off out of the lodge because I needed to find a job. I headed to the port because I heard that many immigrants would find jobs in ports and would make enough money to live on. I saw a sign that said stone cutters for hire. The building behind it had a line of people applying for the job. I got in the line, and when it was my turn, I told them my age. And they said that I would be starting today. He told me to get inside the building. After a week of stone cutting, I received a total amount of $10. I asked them why I had received such a small amount, even though I had worked for every hour they had available. Angrily, he snapped back at me that I was an immigrant and that was all I deserved. He told me to go home. I sadly walked home, looking at the small amount of money I had received. Once I reached the lodging, I put $5 into my savings and $5 for me to use on food and clothes. The days got harder and harder, and the number of people in the lodge got bigger and bigger, causing even more problems. One day I left my neighborhood to go buy food. People around me started making fun of me and teased me for being an immigrant and being British. A boy that was also buying food told me to ignore them because they will continue to stereotype and breed prejudice against us. After 2 years of working and living in the 5 Center Spot Lodge, I gathered enough money to buy my own home. That home is where I live today. I later opened up a railroad factory, making me quite wealthy. I now have enough clothes that I can wear different pairs every day, enough food for me to never get hungry, and best of all, I have my family with me. I sent money back to them, and now they are all here with me today, and we are all living a life where we are free. Now that I look back at everything, the doors of Ellis Island were truly like my doors to destiny. Thank you!
Thank you for coming, William.
Thank you for inviting me.
Before you leave, a toast to Ellis Island, for it was our doors to destiny.
Cheers!